Hey guys, it's your boy Tim Moen here, back at you with the Tim Moen Show. I'm trying to do these more often, guys. But you know what? It's hard to do them by myself. I feel like an idiot. I feel like I'm just talking into space. Like, who the hell is even listening to me? So I invited my old pal Lisa to join me here to be my partner. Lisa, welcome back to the Tim Moen Show.
Glad to be here, Tim.
Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. You could talk me through some issues. Okay. I've set off a bit of a firestorm on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it these days. Rustled some jimmies, as the kids say. Got a few people upset, and that wasn't my intention. But I think my tone was probably not the most constructive. Let's put it that way. I don't think I was insulting, but I was pretty blunt and not very sympathetic to the people I was criticizing. Let's just say that. And so let me give you the backstory. Someone tweeted out, someone that's using a pseudonym on Facebook or on Twitter, which I have mixed feelings about to begin with, right? If you're hiding behind a pseudonym, I don't know how seriously I could take you, but the guy's got a pretty big following, and he tweeted out something that I disagreed with. And he said that the number one political issue right now is mass migration. And I retweeted him and made the comment that no, the most important political issue right now is statism. And, the fact that right-wing populists keep begging the state to solve their problems is why we can't have nice things right now. All right. And that set off a firestorm. I rustled this kid's jimmies. He said, I used to think you were cool when I was 20. And some other kid chimes in, shut up, stupid, called me a cock, called me, they got very upset by this. And, that's fine. They can be upset. I was hoping to have more of a constructive conversation about it. I didn't want to upset populists here because I think they're mostly on the right track. But it does irritate me that they miss the most important political issue of our time, which is what I kind of wanted to talk to you about and see if I could figure out how to convey this. Because for my audience out there, Lisa is, she's kind of a normie in a way, right? Like you're just, I don't see you as being obsessed by the political social media sphere like some of us are, right? Like these guys I was interacting with on Twitter, like I do, spend my days thinking about politics. I'm kind of, obsessed with it. I see where the world. Lisa is just kind of a normal person. She does her life, and she's nice. She has a political point of view, and I think one time you described yourself as a conservative hippie or something like that. I thought that's pretty cool. You're kind of come from, have a conservative bent. You're a rancher, you believe in family values, all those kinds of things. And so I thought it would be good to have someone who isn't like fully immersed in this toxic hellhole of a sphere on social media to help kind of set me straight, maybe point me on a path here, help me communicate my message a little bit better, more productively. So that's why, by the way, I met Lisa politically because you and I were both kind of working for a mutual friend of ours, Tanny Yao, on his campaign. He's a UCP guy. And he was running for office for the first time, didn't know how to do it. So, we were helping him out, and he won. And that's how we first got introduced to each other. And by the way, I got to say, Tanny, I really appreciate that he actually introduced one of the most libertarian things I've seen our government, pieces of legislation that I've seen come out of our government over the past decade, maybe even. And that is, he legalized the ability for you to sell your blood. And, that's an important topic for an important piece of legislation for a number of reasons. One is, it's my blood. Whatever I do for free with it, I should be able to do for pay with it. Obviously, I own my body. I own this. I should be able to do what I want with it. But also, we get the majority of our blood from the US, where they pay people to pay. The reason we get it from the US is because they pay people down there for their blood, and they have an abundance of it. Whereas we didn't have that up here. They said, if you don't give it as a gift, we don't want it.
Yeah.
Essentially. And so we have huge shortage of plasma and blood products in Canada and in Alberta. And so this legislation now allows me to sell my blood. And in fact, I looked it up the other day, and you can make several $100s, like I think up to $600 or $800 a month, selling your blood plasma, and benefiting people who could use that stuff. So it's actually, as the word gets out, I suspect we're going to have a glut of blood out there for, and it's not just good for vampires like me. It was funny because one of these kids that got their jimmies rustled took my Twitter banner. I had a picture of me kind of standing in Parliament, just whatever. It was, so I forgot I even had this, but until he photoshopped the picture and put a vampire's face on my face. And I guess he thinks I look like a vampire, which is a fair assessment. I kind of do in certain angles.
Well, you should be, that's a huge compliment, because if you look at vampire movies and stuff, like, aren't the vampires always hot? So,
well, yeah, I mean, this vampire wasn't super hot. It was like a cartoon Dracula type thing, but I thought it looked kind of cool. And so I actually took the banner that he photoshopped and added the Tim Moen show words to it. And I put that up as my new banner because I think it looks pretty cool. Now he's demanding I pay him for his work, but of course he's anonymous, so I wouldn't know where to send the check. And I doubt he'll have the courage to stand behind his identity, because then he'd have to actually, be responsible for his temper tantrums and stuff. Anyways, I digress. But I mean, all that was to explain why I had Lisa here, how we came to be, and why I value her opinion. So, first of all, do you have any comments about what I've said so far?
No, right now, I can't wait to see how this goes. So I have to laugh because I asked him, I'm like, so what is the most important political issue? Are you going to let me know in advance? And he said no. So I was like, well,
and in fairness, if I told you what it was, it would have required a dissertation to explain what it was, which is part of the problem. It's a difficult...
I was going to say, I think that's problem number one, Tim.
Yeah, that's probably problem number one. So the biggest political problem, the number one thing, and this isn't to say that anything the populists protest against and complain about aren't problems. They're huge problems, but they all stem from one place, and that is statism. Statism is the belief that we need a group of criminals to impose their will on people, and that's how we organize society. And the state is it's an organization. I mean, this is just looking at objective facts, right? It's an organization that comes into being through conquest and plunder, and that's how it maintains itself. It can only maintain itself through violating the very things that it says it's protecting us from. Murder, theft, assault, kidnapping, imprisonment, all these things that we're not allowed to do. The state does with impunity. Taxation is taking money without consent from us. That's my property. The state takes it from me without consent. And it's not just, it doesn't just steal it behind my back. It actually says, look, if you don't hand this money over, there's going to be consequences. If I defend myself from those consequences, guns come out. So it's morally equivalent to armed robbery. The state violates our borders. It violates our property borders in a myriad of ways. It makes our kids do compulsory state education. It tells us we can't have lawn darts or baby walkers, what kind of products we can have, how we can build our homes, how we, it takes the money off our family's table, takes food literally off our family's table, tells us we have to use the currency that they create, that they then, devalue and enrich their oligarchical friends with. The list goes on and on. It also, Lisa, forces us into association with people that are, by all intents and purposes, our enemies, people that would just as soon see us destroyed. You know, there are people on the left that would prefer people like you and I don't even exist, and they would, if not outright kill us, they'd at least marginalize us into oblivion, right? They would make it impossible for us to engage in commerce by confiscating our bank accounts and making us, you know, and this is happening in some places already. So it forces us into association with these people. And so, and that I believe is why populists are so concerned about mass migration, and rightly so. It's that we have a wave of people coming here that don't necessarily share our values, that are maybe have values that are completely antithetical to us, that are maybe even enemies of us, that would prefer to see us destroyed. So the state forces us into association with this. So my point is, look, you can't expect this organization that forces us into association with people that hate us, with people that we don't agree with people that have a different vision of life than us, and expect that, and that constantly exists to open up our borders, to violate our borders. You can't expect that organization to suddenly care about borders and forced association. I mean, that's literally what the state does.
So I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Can you give an example for the non-political mind?
Yes, yes, please.
You know, which is funny because, just to talk about Tony for a second, when he asked me to be his campaign manager, I'm like, you know, I don't even watch the news, right? So, but we still won, so that was good.
We still
won. So what, and this is one thing that I want to see out of politics do more of, is we use big words and we talk about grand sweeping gestures and things like that. But the average everyday normie like me has a hard time comprehending things. So when they talk about, you know, rolling out the budget and stuff, I'm like, well, can you put it as an average housewife's budget and make those decisions, you know, like bust it down into some small infographic that's quick and easy to digest and make it easy for people to see it in their own lives. And so when you're talking about statism, how is it that you can give an example of what this looks like if it was a normal person's relationship with another person, so that they could see just how fucking ridiculous it is? Are you able to do that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, well, and that's just it, right? It's remembering, first of all, that the state is comprised of individuals like you and me, flesh and blood people. And so, well, let's use the Israel-Hamas example right now, right? Or Palestine, and try to here's how I try to analyze it as a libertarian who looks at things through an objective lens, who cuts through the matrix of, this is some kind of nation state, and this is some kind of nation state. We don't, you know, however you define it, and just look at what individual people are doing on the ground. First of all, Hamas did something horribly horrific and immoral, right? So here are some individuals cutting off babies' heads, doing horrific things to these people, and now there's a right to retaliation. There's a right to and a right to protect yourself from these monsters that have done that. Okay. Now, if you or I had something like this happen to our family, where a bad guy, a horrific terrorist came into our home, slaughtered our family in the most horrific way, desecrated their bodies, did all sorts of things. Of course, we have the right to protect ourselves from that. Of course, we have the right to retaliate, wipe that person off the face of the earth. Do we have the right to firebomb his neighborhood to get him, for example, and kill a bunch of other women, children, other thing? Well, probably not. But you could think of examples where maybe that would be okay. For example, if everyone in the neighborhood agreed with and supported what he did, if everyone in the neighborhood demanded that he come and do that to my family, then okay, they're kind of culprits in that crime, right? They're associates in that crime. So that's how I think about these things. Now, I don't have a clear answer on the Israel-Palestine thing because I don't know all the details. I don't know what those people that are getting bombed by Israel had to do with the attack on those innocent lives, right?
So you're not just believing everything that's coming out of the news and taking it as gospel, Tim?
Well, no, of course. And of course, the thing to remember too is, once you look at and understand, just by acknowledging basic reality, just by coldly observing objective facts, right? Removing emotion from this and looking at things. The state, like I said, it exists by plundering us. First of all, it taxes us. It steals from us to maintain its existence. It has borders that it defines, right? So Canada, that everyone's so patriotic about, is basically, for all intents and purposes, a slave plantation. You can think of it that way, right? And so, I mean, if 50% of our labor is owned by the state, and that's about how much we're taxed when you add them all up, then we're at least 50% slave. Now in terms of slave plantations, it's a pretty good one. We're free run slaves in a sense, because, we have a lot of freedoms the master grants us, and that's good. So compared to other plantations, we can be rah patriotic. Our plantation is the best in a lot of ways. But let's not forget that it's a plantation. And so when we look at things like immigration, what is that? Okay, well, it's basically other slaves come into our plantation because it's a better plantation. Now, as a fellow slave, I'll look at that and say, these people are going to make the plantation terrible. They're going to, and of course, as the plantation master, I love this, because I would much rather see the slaves fighting amongst themselves than focusing their attention and unifying against me and noticing that they're on a goddamn plantation, right? And so, of course, they want division, and they want, the idea that the master of this plantation is going to want things that are in our best interest, to me, is a ridiculously naive notion. It can't. I mean, it's going to want to keep us healthy and productive to the degree that it can harvest our tax, right? We're taxed livestock. As a rancher, Lisa, you want your cattle to be healthy, have a wonderful life, so that you can harvest the most you can off of them.
Absolutely.
But make no mistake, that cow is on a ranch and it's going to get harvested, right? Well, it's the same with us. So, this idea. So I don't know if that
you did very good on that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so all these issues that it is an issue. Look, when other slaves mass migrate here for a better plantation, life is likely to get worse for us slaves. The conditions are going to get worse for us. It's not going to be matter to the master, but it will matter to us. And so I get why people are upset by mass migration. In fact, and this is just goes to show you the mindset here of how binary, or how like the political thing is. Like, there's the right and the left, and there's no third way, right? It's like, if I say mass migration isn't our biggest concern, they just assume I'm an open borders guy. I just want let everyone in, right? When in fact, my platform in the last election was very restrictive on immigration. But the difference with me is that I tried to get the state out of immigration altogether, because I see immigration, I see the state as the problem here, right? It's forcing me into association with these people. That's the problem. The problem is the master and this goddamn plantation. It's not these people necessarily. It's the fact that I have to be now in association with them. And that's why people care when someone moves 20 miles across an imaginary line, 2,000 miles away from them, across Roxham Road over in Quebec. They don't care whether they move 20 miles in the other direction. They care whether they move 20 miles in this direction, because now we're forced into association with them. It's the forced association that is the issue, not that person moving 20 miles one direction or another. And so my solution is this. Look, ideally, Lisa, I'm an anarchist. I think the state is a horrifically violent and morally repugnant institution. And I think in 200 or 400 years, we'll be looking back at the state as in the same way we look back at slavery or human sacrifice or something. It was just a dark period in our history. We didn't know better. And, we gained some moral insight over time. Like Martin Luther King, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. And over time, we make moral discoveries. I think eventually we're going to realize the state's immoral. We're going to look back. We're not there yet. But so that is the main problem. So here's how I dealt with that. I'm like, okay, yes, having more. So what we want to do is get power into the individuals, to the people, rather than the state. And so I say, okay, how about we do a sponsorship only immigration policy? In other words, and only by individual Canadians, not by limited liability corporations or any of these statist entities. I mean, they're basically creations of the state. They're given monopoly privileges by the state, all these things. No, we're not allowing those people to sponsor them. You and I, Lisa, can sponsor an immigrant if we want. Now, the caveat is I'm responsible financially and I'm taking on criminal liability for that person. In other words, if that person is an enemy of the people that live in this territory, in this nation, and they do bad things and they do criminal activities, I have some liability there. I'm responsible for whatever, deporting them. I have to bear some responsibility. Exactly what that looked like, I don't know. But I trust that you would do a much better job of vetting someone than the government would, right? So Maxime Bernier is a popular kind of populist party leader. And he rightly points out mass migration is a problem. His solution, though, is statist. He says, here's an arbitrary number that limits the number, 100,000 people, no more than that. So, my son needs a neurosurgeon and the 100,001th, and he's the 100,001th person. He can't immigrate here. Too bad. We've capped out on the quota, right? And likewise, he says, we'll do a values test, right? And now the ironic thing here is that he rightfully criticized Kelly Leach during the Conservative Party leadership race, when she proposed a values test for immigrants. And he said, oh, that's so Trumpian and that's not very Canadian. And somehow he changed his mind. Now he likes the values test. But imagine a values test. I mean, it's going to look something like this. Imagine I'm Hamas or something like that, and I want to immigrate to Canada. And my value is I want to behead innocent babies for jihad or something like that. That's my value. And now I'm confronted with this values test. Oh, shit. What am I going to do? The first question is,
page 28.
Prospective citizen, do you value A, freedom, or B, beheading innocent babies for jihad? What are you going to answer on that question, Lisa? If you're a terrorist, you're going to answer freedom. You're not going to. I mean, it's so easy to game one of these things. And of course, the government is going to administer it. And of course, government is incompetent because they have no ownership. They have no skin in the game. They don't suffer negative repercussions from doing a bad job. And so that immigration is not going to be better. And the other thing it does, that it's saying that the state ought to be involved in immigration, is now when your ideological enemies, the left, gets it, they're going to say, well, the state is involved in, sets immigration, so we're going to open up the floodgates and let everyone in. So the way I look at it, Lisa, all these problems, mass migration, we'll get into some other ones like globalism and wokeism and trans ideology and all this stuff. But all those kind of rotten branches emerge from the root, which is statism. So what happens here is people are trying to cut off these branches while at the same time watering the root of this and fertilizing the root of the problem. And I don't. So do you have any comments about what I just said?
Okay, well, I love the visual of cutting off the branches and still watering the root. And even the fact of like, okay, you have to be the sponsor, the individual sponsor. What are some other issues? Well, you said we'd talk about other issues, because I was going to be like, okay, what about other issues where individuals could be more involved, take more responsibility, be able to lessen the impact of statism or stop watering the roots in that way?
Sure. Okay, let's save that for the end. How can we address the problem of statism? Let's deal with it at the end. But right now, I just really want to make the case that let's recognize the most important problem here, the root of all these problems that populists care about. And populists, I'm saying this with love. You guys have come so far in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, I think Justin Trudeau and the government has done more work to provide to make libertarians than I could ever do. Right? Hold on, Lisa. My dog has gotten into some shit here, and I have to clean up a mess. I'm just going to pause this right back. All right, we're back. My dog, I thought he had ripped apart one of my wife's pillows because I just saw a big mass of like fuzz and garbage over there. There's a huge pile, but what he did was he got into the garbage and pulled out a bunch of dryer, lint, and fuzz and like scattered it all over the place.
That's better than your wife's pillow.
Yes. I breathe a sigh of relief there. Jeez, that would have been nasty. I would have needed the government's protection. One time I might have actually asked for the state to help me. Okay, where were we? We were talking about, the number one issue, right, is statism. And so let's go through some of the other issues that populists care about that are very good issues. And again, I say this with all love to populists because they were out there protesting for our freedoms. They were out there on the front lines. They were doing all sorts of things, and they've come so far, right? And they're almost there. And I just want to push them over the edge so that they're not kicking themselves in the nuts here. Like, this is something that conservatives tend to do, right? Is they plant the seeds of their own destruction. So, for example, they value the family and they value tradition, and then they implement government programs and they say, oh, you got to get a marriage license, and the government controls marriage and make sure that it's all up and up and that matches conservative values. And it's no coincidence that, we have the highest divorce rate ever, that families are broken apart. Once you get the government involved, you're handing a cudgel to your ideological enemy than to use it. And family law and all these things have destroyed families. Getting the government involved in the family has not helped. Protecting us from terrorists, right? Waging a war on terrorism. Right now, I don't know about you, but it feels very similar in terms of the attitude right after 9/11 happened, right? And there's just a bloodlust, and people were shocked and dismayed and appalled and demanding the government do something and wage war and get back at these people. And next thing you know, the Western world is in Iraq and Afghanistan and Middle East and creating more problems, creating more terrorists than they killed, right? And now we're seeing that with Israel and Hamas, that the absolute visceral and heart-wrenching and anger and frustration that Israel and the Western world is reacting from is likely to backfire, and even potentially launch us into World War III. The more brutal Israel is in its retaliation, the more terrorists, jihadists are formed, and the more these Islamic states want to get involved in protecting innocents from the onslaught. And so, so my point is, conservatives have great values. The problem is that government always corrupts those values when they ask the government to protect or preserve or promote conservative values. Almost always, without fail, things get worse. Drug war, right? Drug addiction is horrible, decimates communities. So what do? We implement a suite of policies that launch fentanyl to the forefront. And I mean, I could do a whole episode on what those policies are, because I'm on the front line of that every single day. And I've seen it evolve over time in my career, how it's become a huge problem. And these problems almost always coincide with new legislation or new policies that are brought into place to try to stop the problem of drugs, and they are actually making everything worse. So all these things. Okay, so now let's go through some of the things. So we talked about immigration, and I tried to make a case as to why asking the state to solve the problem of mass migration is likely to backfire, and it's already backfired, right? I mean, coupled with our foreign policy of destabilizing destabilizing the Middle East, and three-letter agencies like the CIA and all these agencies that are supposed to protect us getting involved in destabilizing like socialist countries or destabilizing other countries and installing socialist leaders and creating, they create waves of migrants that are fleeing the instability and the horror that
their plantations.
Yeah, their plantations that our slave masters had a hand in making even worse, right? So I try to make that case for immigration, but let me just talk about some other things that I see that worry me a little bit. So, Bernier, for example, and a lot of people say that climate policy is immoral because there's no climate emergency, right? Now, that doesn't sound too bad. That's 50% right. You could have stopped that climate policy is immoral. All right, that's enough. But that you add because there's no climate emergency implies that if there was a climate emergency or some kind of a real emergency, then we need the government to get involved. No. We need freedom fighters that say climate policy is immoral, period, full stop. And if there was a climate emergency coming, it would be even worse because the government only makes problems worse. It doesn't make it better. So we would need a system of property rights and a way to resolve disputes that gets the government out of it, that we could then hold polluters to account or something like that. But they're demanding they seem to agree with the left that, yeah, of course, government would need to get involved if there was a climate emergency. But guys, there's no climate emergency, therefore we don't need it. All right. I see the same sort of thinking when it comes to public health or pandemics, right? Everyone who is, most of the people who are marching because they think the vaccines are dangerous or because COVID was a hoax, and they're probably right about a lot of that. But that's not why public policy like lockdowns and mask mandates and vaccine mandates were immoral. They were immoral, full stop. They were immoral, and you really need to understand this, populace, and understand why. And if you don't, you're not helping. The reason they're immoral, they would be immoral even if the virus was 100% fatal, even if the vaccine was 100% safe and effective, even if lockdowns worked to stop the spread and masks. Yeah, even if all those things were 100% true, even if everything the establishment media says is true, all these things are still immoral. And they're immoral because they violate individual rights. They grant one group the right to point guns at another group. And of course, it doesn't work, right? That doesn't work. And that's why government policy hardly ever works, because as Ayn Rand once said, what is moral is also pragmatic. So if you stick to principle, usually that works out for the best, So, yeah. Another example has to do with wokeism. I see a lot of populists cheer when governments implement a policy that abolishes so-called trans rights or something, right? So, for example, in Saskatchewan, we just saw the government there introduce legislation that makes it illegal or something like that for teachers to keep secrets from parents about their kids' sexual expression or gender expression in school. So teachers are now forced to tell parents if their kid starts using a different pronoun or something like that. And so a lot of populists will cheer this. And frankly, I like the policy too. Like, I would never send my kid to a school where the teacher kept secrets like that from me, or tried to subvert my kids. But the problem is that the policy does nothing to address the problem that government schools are there to indoctrinate your kids, to warp their minds, and always will be and can't be reformed. The teachers are come from leftist institutions. So, you can put, I mean, it's almost like conservatives or populists want to put these teachers into like a robot armor that they control, right? Like, we're going to control it, make the teacher do what we want. We're not going to let them rely on their judgment or their experience to make the best decision given the context of that individual situation. We want a cudgel. We want a one top down, one rule for all. Don't use your clinical judgment or, and I don't think that's what anyone wants. And by the way, this isn't really even solving a problem, is it? Because the people that are concerned about teachers keeping secrets about gender pronouns from them are very unlikely to have kids that are going to use gender pronouns or, identify as trans in the school. They come from conservative families who are raised in good family values. They're likely not to be as confused as, say, kids who are raised by maybe single moms or by leftists who. So what are you going to do about the families that these kids come from? And those families where kids are identifying, I mean, they're not likely to care about whether the teacher keeps a secret or not. They in fact, they might embrace it. And, in certain circumstances, like, for example, if my kid was struggling with mental health and needed to go to a therapist, I would hope that therapist would create an environment of trust with the child and use their discretion about how much of that therapy session they tell me about, right? In order to maintain some trust with that child and get them to open up and get them to get to the root of the problem. And so I want to defer to the experts. If I'm in a libertarian society and I'm sending my kids to a school, I don't want to control what that teacher's doing, because I'm sending them to a school specifically for that teacher's expertise. Otherwise, I'd do it myself. I'd be homeschooling. So I don't want a government telling teachers what to do. And so now what you've said is, okay, the government plays a role, and it's the role of government is to control what our kids learn and to be the mediator between the teacher and the child, between that relationship. That's the government's job, is to do that. Well, I don't think that's really what populists want. I don't think that is ultimately what you want, guys. I think what you should be arguing for is not how the government should properly control schools. It should be for the abolition of state and education. They don't go together. It's wild. So march in the streets for that. Don't march for better government. There's no such thing.
Can you think of a time?
Yes.
Where government made things better?
Yeah, I'm struggling here. There's got to be a time when it, even by accident, made things better, right? Accidentally made things better. And I'm trying to think about it, because I mean, in my life, I can't think of anything in my personal life, in my life experience, where government has made anything better. Now, if I maybe go back in time and believe like the myths that historians teach, right? The victors always write the history. Well, then, you might make an argument for, say, the civil rights movement in America, but that seems to be falling apart now. It seems to have worked for a little while, but now it's been twisted and turned on its head. And so, it accelerated what was naturally happening anyways. Desegregation, all those kinds of things were happening. Racism was going away because of market interactions. People are, even racist people are more interested in making money than they are in harboring hate, right? And so in the process of making money, they realize, oh, these people aren't what I thought they were, and they start to disabuse some of their racist notions. So I mean, I guess you could make an argument for that. But and again, now we're seeing it twisted, turned on its head. We've created a giant race war now, and that a lot of that has its roots in the civil rights movement. which basically has said that rights come from the government, and therefore we're handing out rights to people based on racial characteristics or something like that. Another area where you might argue that that government helped was in cleaning up the mess that it made in World War One, and taking out Hitler in World War II or something like that. But again, that ignores the fact that the Treaty of Versailles and all the insane things that were foisted on the German people by other governments around them set the stage for a guy like Hitler to come into power, who was going to fix all these problems and return Germany to its might and overturn the draconian Versailles sanctions and those kinds of things. So at best, World War II was a just cleaning up mess. So maybe it cleaned up the mess there. Maybe you could think of some things.
I can't. I was like, because I had a friend the other day that was like, aren't you excited that the government recently promised $165 million split between federal and provincial money to go towards ranchers that have had this trouble with the drought and rising feed costs and that kind of thing to support and stabilize our food industry.
Right.
So you can get up to $150 or whatever to make up the difference. And they're like, aren't you glad the government supported you that way? Well, not fucking really, because now you just dropped the cattle market by $150 an animal and increased feed costs by $150 an animal. So the rancher you were protecting now lost $300 at least. You know what I mean? So well, I just asked just in case you had a good example.
And I suspect if you look at the root of why it's so hard to make it as a rancher and why you might need a government program like this, there's some government involved in the root of the problem there as well, right? I mean, we know that supply management and all these different things raises price on consumers, hampers people from being able to produce milk themselves and engage in different types of market for, say, raw milk or different things like that. Harry Brown, a famous libertarian back in the day, used to say, the government is good at breaking your legs and then offering you a crutch and, kind of demanding praise for its beneficence, right? And that's typically what all these things are doing. And I mean, we could talk about that all the way down. Like, even with immigration here, it is broken your legs by importing mass migrants, and now it's offered a crutch. It's to get you hooked on. It's to create kind of a Stockholm syndrome of sorts of like, yeah, I need this crutch because you broke my leg. So I guess thanks. But what you've done in accepting that crutch and what you've done by asking for that crutch is to ensure that leg breaker remains your overseer forever, right? You're like, yeah, I need government because who else is going to fix my broken legs? They literally have a monopoly in Canada on healthcare. They're the only ones that can fix my legs, right?
True.
So yeah, absolutely. So have I? So yes. So to bring it back full circle, again, the issue is the state, right? And I could see this play out in all sorts of areas, like even when it comes to big tech and giant corporations, right? And a lot of populists rightly point at giant corporations as not having their best interests at heart. Well, why is it that they don't have your best interests at heart? It's because they can increase their profit margins and improve their by lobbying government, by getting in bed with government, by creating a suite of regulations that ensures they maintain a monopoly and crush the competition. And this is how all corporations that are successful work. And in fact, if you're a CEO of one of these corporations, it's literally your fiduciary duty. It's your legal duty to maximize shareholder profits. And when you know that going to lobby in the nation's capital can increase your shareholder or your stock value by 400% for every dollar you spend, you get a 400% rate of return. Well, you are not doing your job if you don't lobby government. And so, but the problem isn't that the corporations are lobbying the government. The problem is that we have that government there to begin with that creates the game that which these guys are doing a magnificent job of playing. And we see it with tech companies like Google, Facebook, all these places that have a monopoly in a sense, or an oligopoly. They don't have a strict monopoly, but it's very difficult for others to start up competitors because of a lot of reasons. One is all the regulation around how the companies operate, what kind of language is allowed. And of course, that regulation is only increasing in Canada. Podcasts are now required to report to the government or something like that if they're over a certain size. You can see government further encroaching on this, but also IP, intellectual property, which is just which is a false name because it's actually intellectual monopoly, and it allows a corporation to operate without any competition for 17 years, say, because they came up with the idea first. I started that pizza company first, or that pizza restaurant first. Therefore, no one else can have a pizza company in my town for 17 years, because otherwise, what incentive do I have to start? If there's competition, what incentive? Well, all these, this IP regime ingrained. So as a libertarian, we can see all the ways in which statism creates this monster, creates these giant corporations that don't have our best interests at heart. And from there, and now another thing that I didn't touch on was globalism. A huge thing that the populists like to complain about is globalism. And globalism is this idea that there are some elites in the world, the Klaus Schwabs, the Rothschilds, Bill Gates, these big organizations like the World Economic Forum, the UN, and its Agenda 2030 or Agenda 21, I think was the old one. They have these giant plans to essentially try to govern the world in a unified way, right? To insert their control over our sovereign territory, over Canada's sovereign territory, 15-minute cities, carbon emissions, you go down the list, how communities are organized and what values they're organized around. All these things come out of a playbook produced by some of these organizations. Yeah, it's nefarious, it's bad intent, and it's only possible if we have a government, a national government, right? Because Klaus Schwab doesn't have any guns. He can't impose any of this stuff on us. So who imposes it on us? It's the policeman down the street who is given orders by our politicians that imposes it on us, right? So what we need is not to have that mechanism of control, so that globalists, so now when I read UN Agenda 21, if I'm in a libertarian society, I'm like, well, that's an interesting gardening manual, but I don't think I need it. I throw it away, and I don't care what their intentions are. They don't have an army. They're not going to invade me, and there's no mechanism of control around me that is going to impose their wishes for prestige or kickbacks or whatever the globalist cabal offers our politicians. So again, everything comes back to the state, Lisa, and the state is supported by statism. And that's a widespread belief in the people that government is needed to solve problems. And we see it everywhere. And my hope is that I can convince populists to disabuse statism and say, look, the government isn't the solution. It's the problem. It's the root of the problem of everything I care about, everything that I'm worried about, from adrenochrome pedophiles to immigration to climate policy to pandemics. All these things, the problems flows from the state, and so the state needs to be at least restrained. I mean, I would like to take it further, but but I realize that's not realistic, and it's probably not even warranted. I mean, the ideal solution for me would to be over a series of decades, gradually disassemble these instruments of control over us in a way that doesn't leave people behind and different things like that. You can't just snap your fingers and wish it gone. Although Murray Rothbard said that would probably be the best, maybe he was right, but I think it'd be good to do it in a organized fashion, and maybe just start with the latest law, repeal that, and work our way all the way back to the beginning, and, and just keep doing that until something like that. But okay, go ahead. Sorry. Any questions?
So what does the average person do then? Keeping in mind that humans are inherently lazy and we like to abdicate responsibility to others rather than taking personal responsibility for anything.
Yeah, it's a serious issue. I mean, there's that meme it's been floating around for years of hard men create good times create weak men create hard times, and the cycle continues, right? And it's every parent's kind of issue too, right? Because it's like some of the people who are the most successful that I know have had horrific childhoods. They've had to really struggle, and they've learned a certain resilience and toughness and discipline by coming out of those environments in order to survive. Now, I think the majority of kids in those environments end up the opposite way. But, and so I never want to subject my kids to a horrific childhood though, right? I wanted things to be easier for them than it was for me. But then that creates the condition of, well, what kind of people are they going to be if they've never had to struggle for anything? And so I think what we have to do as parents is what we have to do also for ourselves. And that's implement some form of hardship might be the wrong word, but yeah, we have to create some resistance. We have to create challenge for ourselves. We have to get out of our comfort zone and now purposefully make life more uncomfortable for ourselves by going to the gym, eating a diet, having a difficult conversation that we don't want to have, taking a pay cut so that we can homeschool our kids, or going down to one income so we can homeschool our kid. Like we have to make sacrifices and hardships for a better future, and for things. And the degree to which we take personal responsibility is the degree to which we have more liberty in our own lives. And so, to me, I think that the answer is not in necessarily convincing more people to become libertarians, even though that's what I'm kind of trying to do here on this podcast. And that's what I've done my whole political career, is try to make more libertarians. I think the answer beyond that is take personal responsibility. Once you accept my premise that the state is an evil organization, we stop relying on evil organizations and start taking more responsibility in our own lives for our issues. Instead of calling the government when we have a problem, we deal with it ourselves. We work it out ourselves, right? I mean, in my profession, I always joke to my partners, as a firefighter, EMT, a paramedic, I always joke when we get a call, it's like, oh, okay, they're calling the government again. And, a lot of these problems they're calling us for could be very easily solved themselves if they took some personal responsibility and looked up some information, talked to someone, but because everything's free for them, they're like, well, I don't have to, make myself uncomfortable or worry about this. There's a government program for that. We see it all the time. My neighbor falls on hard times. There's a government program for that. I don't have to worry myself about that. Mm-hmm. Little girl goes missing or whatever. There's, I don't have to worry about that. The government will figure it out. We are so enculturated to disabuse ourselves of personal responsibility and just rely on the government for everything that, of course, it's a giant megalith. So what we have to do as individuals is take back the power, take back the personal responsibility ourselves, and try to convince more and more people to do the same. And that might not be enough. In fact, it probably won't be. I mean, people are just follow their incentives. They're self-interested, and they're never going to do something that, it goes against their self-interest. So government's likely to continue to grow. And then, at some point, everything's going to collapse. Things are going to get hard. I think we may be in for some tough years here. I think we might be just at the start of a recession. Life is going to be difficult. And hey, we're going to be forced to take personal responsibility, and people can do it. And then what we have to do is not ask the government to bail us out in the end when things start to get better, and say, hey, We need you to make sure this never happens again. That's why it happened. I mean, government is why we're going into a recession. It locked down the economy. It printed up, scads of money. And that is a recipe for disaster and recession. And asking the government then to fix that problem, to give us crutches now that it broke our legs, is the wrong approach.
So what's one way that you think that people could start taking baby steps towards personal responsibility? Do you have any pointers?
Sure. Well, the first thing you can do is when you wake up in the morning, don't immediately go to social media and get out of bed on the wrong side and have a bad mood, right? The first thing you can do is take control over your thoughts and wake up with intention and think of things you can be grateful for. I actually got this from a former Navy SEAL, Mark Devine, who said one of the biggest tips he can give someone, because he said the difference between someone who's successful in a Navy, getting into Navy SEALs, and someone who's unsuccessful isn't their physical capability. They're all physical studs. The difference is the mindset, and the number one mindset is gratitude. So wake up in the morning, drink a cold glass of water, and think of all the things that you're grateful for while you're guzzling that water down and hydrating your cells. Visualize your cells bursting with fullness and engaging in their environment, and feel yourself doing the same thing. So it's all about mindset. It's about not getting drugged down into and being controlled by fear, anxiety, all these negative emotions. It's about purposely cultivating a positive mindset that no matter how things go external to me, I can't control what the government does. I can't control what my boss is doing. I can't control my neighbors are doing. I do this every day when I go to work, because I work for the government. I'm a firefighter paramedic, right? We got treated like extensions of a will. I mean, we're literally, like I was telling you about those teachers that are just going to be automatons by the end of government control. That's how we are. We follow a set thing. We can't deviate. It's insulting. It's humiliating. It's dehumanizing the way we're treated at work. So, but yet I still have fun at work. I still have joy at work because I make that my intention. I make it purposeful. I'm like, how are we going to have fun? And then I talk to my partners and my crew about that. How are we going to make this shift awesome despite the government bending us over and ass raping us today? Hey, Lisa, you can't get raped if you enjoy it. You know what I'm saying? And so it's a little trick I learned from a guy going into prison. I'm like, how do you deal with that? He's like, well, you can't get raped if you enjoy it. And I'm like, that's a good trick. I'll have to remember that. So mindset. Maybe that's it's probably a bad analogy. I'm probably going to get canceled. But mindset is really 9/10 of it. And then you build from there. It's just little steps, right? Getting your life in order. If you find yourself on Twitter calling a washed up libertarian leader a know nothing and a cuck and nobody cares about you and you're irrelevant. If you find yourself on Facebook calling an irrelevant person irrelevant, that might be a sign that you ought to focus less on your external environment, focus more on the mirror. If you have that much time in the day to do that, you surely have time to hit the gym, to do something, do an active service for someone in your community, to get involved in creating something positive in your life. So, there's a quote from, I went to this school in, it was a training center, political training center in Virginia. And the founder said something like this: in volunteer politics, a builder can build faster than a destroyer can tear things down, or something like that. And I think that's generally a good rule of life for you. It's a good rule for life, right? I mean, just build something, no matter who hates you. Don't worry about fighting people who are sniping at you, who are armchair quarterbacking you, who are, focus on yourself and what you can do, and don't get pulled into being a reactionary, of having to react to people who are have nothing going on in their life and are just armchair quarterbacking you. I guarantee you, the people that are doing things aren't on that you would look up to, the kind of people that you would aspire to be, aren't on social media cutting other people down. So, and I need to take some of that advice myself, because the tone of that started this whole thing probably wasn't the most constructive. So, you know,
I think that that's a great way to let your viewer see where they can start taking personal responsibility and recognize where it is that they've abdicated it. I love being on the show today, Tim.
Oh, well, thank you.
Did it achieve what you wanted?
It definitely achieved what I wanted. I mean, I was going to do, I started doing a podcast on this yesterday, and I just felt like an idiot talking into an empty computer screen, right? Just seeing my face looking back at me. And I'm like, oh my God, yeah. Anyways, I appreciate that. I do need to, I think I realize I need like a partner in crime when I do these podcasts. I do a lot of interviews, but, you know, I also want to do a lot more commentary on like what's going on in the world right now, what's on my mind, that sort of thing, where I'm not interviewing people, but getting my own thoughts out. So I appreciate you coming on and being a sounding board for me.
Well, it was awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, guys. Please share the video with your friendly populists. Let them know this video was done out of love. It wasn't done out of, you know, I may come across blunt. Sometimes I get annoyed because I see people kicking themselves in their own junk. You know, I'm like, God damn it, guys. I see it with conservatives all the time. That's why there's that saying Michael Malice came up with is conservatism is progressivism driving the speed limit. And the way it's going right now, I would say that populism is conservatism driving the speed limit, which is progressivism driving the speed limit. So populism is like maybe progressivism driving way under the speed limit, but we don't need to be going in that direction at all. We don't need the state involved in any of this. The state leads to progressivism. State leads to authoritarianism. We can move away from that. We can find ways to solve these problems ourselves, but we can't do that by promoting the state and asking it to solve our problems, or running political campaigns where we promise to, when we get elected, that we will use the state to solve all your problems for you and fix mass migration and fix climate policy and fix it. No, state's not going to do any of that. And the only way we're going to turn it around is from the bottom up, not the top down. Anyways, thank you so much, Lisa. Till next time. See you later.
Looking forward to it.